stand outside nightclubs and we hand out branded condoms.
So how do we go from Hannah and her Squarespace website to Forbes 30 under 30, VC backing, team, all the accolades?
There's 3 million students that study every year, and where is that platform that takes care of them? There's literally a marketplace solution for everything out there, but when it came to students, there wasn't that one-stop shop. Spent that summer thinking through a business plan.
That's incredibly uncommon for 21-year-olds.
I cold called for the first time and I pitched. Most of the time they would tell me it was completely and why they would never use it. And I would probably cry, and then I would rewrite my pitch and I'd go out and I'd call again. By pitching the wrong pitch several times, then I was able to kind of understand what their kind of struggles were. Being able to pitch to clients and then later investors is such an important skill set. To be part of the change and want to be a role model to encourage more women to do their own ventures.
Welcome to Strategy and Tragedy, the show all about how to scale and fail in business. My name is Stephanie Melodia, and it is my genuine pleasure to interview some incredible entrepreneurs here on this show, where they all share their raw and honest journeys to help you avoid making the same mistakes they did and provide you with your dose of entrepreneurial inspiration. I just want to say thank you so much for tuning into this show. I can't wait to get stuck in to interview my next guest. She's listed in this year's Forbes 30 under 30 and named by the Times as one of the 25 most inspiring people. But just before we get on with this episode, you know what to do. Please hit that follow or subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts, and let's dive in. Hannah Chappatte is the founder and CEO of HYBR, the UK's #1 accommodation platform on TrustPilot, with press featured in the likes of the BBC, Evening Standard, and the Times. Hannah, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, well, amazing to have you here on the show. Thank you so much for joining us. I've got so many questions I want to ask you, but first of all, let's start at the beginning. What was the genesis for HYBR?
So I was a student at the University of Bristol. I studied liberal arts, so it was taking the American system as inspiration in the UK in its second year. So it meant I could major in English, but I did history, philosophy, ethics, so a wide range of different subjects. And in my final year, was kind of going to go down the traditional route of consulting. Tried it out, pretty much applied for every single consulting grad scheme you could ever imagine. I think at one point I was applying for kind of construction grad schemes, even though of course that's really not my expertise.
You do like building things.
I do, so exactly, and actually ended up in real estate, so not too far off. But really, yeah, tried every application process and absolutely hated it. And it filled me with so much dread and anxiety. And then I'd get home and me and my flatmate would talk about HYBR, and we talk about the gap in the market of, like, you know, there's 3 million students that study every year, and where is that platform that takes care of them? Where is that platform that guides them through the journey of renting for the first time and helps them understand what's a deposit, what's a guarantor, what's a tenancy agreement, and what's the right property for their unique preferences? And there's literally a marketplace solution for everything out there. If you think about comparing clothes, comparing flights, even insurance products. But when it came to students, they go through the same kind of ordeal every year. There wasn't that one-stop shop. There wasn't that solution.
So you're chatting to your flatmate about potential business ideas. Now, I don't know whether things have just changed quite a lot since I was last at university, but I feel like that's incredibly uncommon for 21-year-olds these days. Were you surrounded by kind of entrepreneurially minded people? Did you come from an entrepreneurial family? Like, how did having that conversation with your flatmate when you were 21 feel kind of more like a thing to do, like more normalized, if you see what I mean?
No, yeah, I completely get that. So my flatmate actually had that idea originally, and every time he lived with a different person, he'd bring it up. And then when he spoke to me about it, I completely latched on, and we just carried on unpacking it and brainstorming. And now I come to think of it, so my mum started a business when I was involved in an early stage business when I was potentially around like 10, so I was like much younger, and it failed because of the credit crash. But I think
what was the business? Just out of
curiosity? It was ahead of its time. It was a healthy sports drink that was competing with Lucozade.
Interesting.
So when I was younger, I used to go to like the marathons and hand out samples and speak to people about the drink. And I went through that ordeal with her. I saw her go through it, and it failed, but it probably gave me a sense of, oh, this is what it is. It's like starting your own brand from scratch. And I got that kind of insight.
Yeah, that makes sense, because as I say, you kind of need you need to, you've got, especially with women, you've got that phrase, see her, be her. You need to know that these things are possible. At least from my perspective, there were just so many things that I never even knew existed, let alone having the conversation about them.
100%. And actually another big driver was my brother at that point had already gone and was working at the time for Africa's first tech unicorn. So it was the kind of equivalent of Amazon. He was living in Ghana at that time, heading up the business in Ghana, and then moved to Kenya. So he had dipped a toe into the world of startups, and I was really fascinated. And I went to actually go work with him in the customer success team in Nairobi during my first year summer of university. So also got the experience of being part of a kind of scale up venture-backed business. And I found it really exciting. And I think, as you just said, that's why network is a privilege. And so important. You need to have that exposure of what's out there, otherwise you have no idea.
I saw you post about network as a privilege, actually, and I definitely wanted to get stuck into the networking piece as well, so we'll get around to that definitely.
Did you know that 8 out of 10 entrepreneurs go into business to be their own boss? And 8 out of 10 stats that are made up on the spot, so was that one. But my guess is that you did not go into business to be bogged down by admin, paperwork, legal compliance. No, you went into business to have the freedom that you've always desired and to execute on the vision for your company. Strategy and tragedy listeners, this is why I am genuinely so proud to partner with Deal, the all-in-one platform for global teams. That's Deal, D-E-E-L. They make it simple for companies managing international teams to seamlessly hire, onboard, and pay both global employees as well as contractors if you're working with freelancers. They handle all of the paperwork, exchange foreign salaries into local ones, and ensure compliance with local regulations, which honestly I think is just about as fun as it sounds. So if you're a savvy entrepreneur, then you know what to do. You need to outsource that stuff that should not be bogging you down to the experts like Deal. They are designed with the needs of a global workforce in mind. Seamless contract signing, easy expense uploads, in-platform time off management, and more. Plus, its customer support team is available 24/7, no matter the time zone. If you're ready to see how Deal can transform your global workforce operations, then head to the link in the show notes and let's dive back into the episode. Thanks for listening.
So for now then, so we're back in those early days. You're 21, you have had those other exposures. So you saw your mum start a business, you followed your brother to Africa. So you kind of been exposed to entrepreneurialism, if you like. So this other flatmate of yours is talking to you about that pain point. You're like, yeah, I think you're onto something. Where did you go from there in terms of validating that there's enough of a demand to actually go out and build a business off the back of this pain point, and B, I guess less tangibly, what kind of gave you that confidence to go for it and be like, yeah, there's actually for it to go more than a conversation into a real life business?
So I spent that summer, after I graduated in about July 2019, spent that summer thinking through a business plan and writing out a business plan, obviously Googling a template. And then I came back and went back to Bristol, where I went to university, and got loads of donuts, handed out donuts outside the library, and spoke to students about their experience renting, just to validate that it wasn't just me and my friends. Wanted to understand a bit of a wider experience.
And can I just check at this point, sorry to jump in, but you mentioned you studied liberal arts, so it was a whole mixture of different topics. Was business studies part of the mix? No. So how did you know that market research is a thing, to go out there and speak to customers? Did you feel like that was just kind of common sense, or did someone else? Because I feel like so many people sort of lack that structure and what are the steps I take? What do I do next? So how did you know to do that?
I read The Lean Startup,
right,
and which is a bit of a Bible for starting your own business. But also it's like kind of your instinct, right? If you want to build a kind of a solution, you need to understand the pain points. You need to speak to as many people as possible who go through those pain points, who endure it on a yearly basis.
You'd be amazed how many people don't do that. So at risk of asking you obvious questions,
no,
I've met a lot of entrepreneurs who don't go by the book, quite literally, Lean Startup. So I love that you mentioned that. All right, cool. So back to donuts.
So yeah, the donuts, great way to start a conversation if you need to bribe some people. And I mean, speak to any student, and they're normally very vocal and very passionate on the subject. So I was hearing about students moving into properties where there were no roofs, when they were literally getting rained on, someone got trench foot. I mean, it was awful stories. This is just standing outside a random library in Bristol, and constantly hearing about exploitation and constantly hearing about the fear and all the anxiety around renting, and just kind of constant stories of battling with landlords disrespecting the students, people experiencing being taken advantage of, and them just fundamentally not understanding their rights, not understanding what they can expect from the rental market. So that really kind of inspired me to continue the research. And at the time I wasn't thinking about, building an empire, raising money. I was just thinking about, what am I going to do this week? What am I going to do the next month? What do I want to validate? What do I want to prove?
Amazing. So you've clearly got an entrepreneurial spirit, if not, born entrepreneur. It seems like it's in your DNA. I listed out just some of the accolades in your intro, and obviously we'll get more into all of that as we get in. But did you, at this point in the story, were you questioning your choice of degree at Bristol? Why didn't you go and choose entrepreneurship or business studies if you felt like there was that entrepreneurial drive that you had?
If you'd asked me back in 2019, I wasn't really even aware of that word, entrepreneur. I wasn't thinking about being an entrepreneur. I wasn't even fully vested within that kind of the world that we're now in. I just thought, there's a really obvious problem. Why is there not already the solution out there? That's all I was thinking about.
This sounds like a born entrepreneur to me, to be honest.
But so back when I was 18 and choosing my degree, I don't have any regrets. I absolutely loved my degree. I just didn't even know that world existed.
Yeah, and this is just something I feel so this is a big pain point, and I'm glad there are people out there that are solving it with education. I don't think it makes one iota of sense that when you are 17, 18, making those selective choices about where to narrow down, we start narrowing down at GCSE level and then A levels, and then, it's here in the UK, and all the way down to a single subject. So you see with the liberal arts, you're saying sort of take inspiration from the American sort of setup, but, most people, they either go and do, geography at Loughborough or whatever. And then 4 years later in student debt, and not only 4 years of your life, but 4 years of very valuable years of your life, you then go out into the real world, and then you discover these things like, what's an entrepreneur? What's this whole other world? What's marketing? What's this? And then it's kind of, you then explore everything else.
But I think it's such an important process to go through, because the whole point of university is that it allows you to grow up. It gives you longer to work out who you are. And a lot of the time that kind of process isn't about who you want to be in a professional sense, but it's more about who you want to be in the personal sense. And I think it's such 3 or 4 years that's so important to really broaden your horizons and help you take that first step into the real world. And I think universities, to your point, can do a lot better job of showcasing the different societies, the different events, the different opportunities out there. And sadly, apart from the first year when I was involved in the kind of JSOC, which was a great experience, I was given about £25,000 to manage and run events in my first year of university when I was generally 18. And that was a really good eye-opening experience of how to, kind of run a campaign and how to kind of mobilize students and get them excited about an initiative. But I think university can do a much better job of helping every student get that experience and build their confidence. That's why I'm such a big fan of ambassador schemes, because again, it's dipping your toe, gaining confidence, working out what you're really bad at and what you're really good at.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, perfect. So you've been speaking to Bristolian students. There's this definitely acute pain points that are being experienced. You've also got the frequency, the volume. So you're like, okay, we're on to something here. What next? Did you then go out to fundraise? What was the next step to kind of get HYBR on its journey?
So we're a two-sided marketplace. So I felt very confident in one side of the proposition, which was B2C. It's what's the pain points from a student perspective. But I needed to understand the pain points from a landlord perspective, which I knew nothing about. So that was definitely the hardest part, and still is as a marketplace, locking in and be able to kind of own the supply. So I went out and I called all the landlords that I'd ever rented from, and I called through all my friends' landlords that they'd ever rented from, and I cold called for the first time and I pitched. And I used to have to kind of hype myself up, literally boxing and trying to do a really weak press up, to really kind of get myself into that zone. And I would pitch, and most of the time they would tell me it was completely shit and why they would never use it. And I would probably cry, and then I would rewrite my pitch and I'd go out and I'd call again. And it was such an important process. It was really difficult, but it really allowed me to understand what were the pain points and what was that possible solution. How could we position ourselves as a unique product within that kind of real estate sector? So that's what I did to then get our first. And through that process, I won our kind of the first few clients for HYBR, got their properties listed onto HYBR, matched them to the relevant students. There again, no tech involved. Squarespace website, no code needed, but then validated the concept on a very small scale, so generating revenue, and then went from there.
And was this kind of concierge MVP or mechanical Turk are the two terms for that, where basically you're the one? For any listeners who aren't familiar with these weird terms, it's so funny because if you're coming from the outside and you hear people talk about like the CAC for unicorns and like MVP, it's like, wait, it's just like acronym central. Jargon. So the two terms, just to clarify, so you've got concierge MVP, which I think actually came from the Lean Startup book, possibly. And then you've got mechanical Turk, which essentially are kind of interchangeable terms. They both mean that it's you or a person that's behind the scenes manually doing it. So was it you at this point only?
Just me.
Just you. So you and your Squarespace website. I feel like this is a very... understandably for somebody as incredible as you, like quick one, this is future Steph coming to you from beyond. If you're enjoying this episode, then you can probably guess what I want you to do. Please do me one tiny favor that costs you nothing and takes a second of your time. Hit that subscribe button. It really helps to support this show, and I'm really grateful for you listening. Let's get back into it. How did you come up with how much to charge? What's the pricing model? Like, were you just kind of figuring it out? What was your process there?
Market research, so looking at what kind of competitors in the space traditional agents would charge, and then really testing it out with clients, seeing what they would be happy to pay for that service, provide them with that service, and then seeing if there was any way to upsell. That's how it really kind of started, kind of got into motion. And then...
So just on that, So with I love how you describe the dual-sided marketplace, and you've got tons of pain point that's being felt by the students. Landlords, you're getting the door slammed in your face, you're getting these rejections, you're picking yourself back up. So I imagine you finally got, like, you refined the pitch, you got someone to give you a chance. It is then another thing to get someone paying for something. So, one thing is, maybe send me some more information, or I'll sign up, I'll create a free account. Like, that's already like a few hurdles.
So the difference with how I went about it is it was always paid. There was no freemium. So I signed up landlords on the paid package. I got their properties online. I understood their kind of criteria, affordability, what was kind of the referencing process needed. And then I went out to capture the student market and match them to the property, delivered them those kind of pre-qualified group ready to move in, and then got paid for the service and invoiced for the service.
So what was the pain point that you managed to identify to the landlords that was not only enough to get them to sign up, but enough to get them to pay?
So the big issue for the private landlords we were targeting at the time is that they're drowning in inquiries. If they post on Spare Room or Open Rent, or if they're a kind of small agent and they post on Rightmove, they're going to get about 50 inquiries per property, which means as a very small team or just one of them, they're completely drowning. And they're having to manually vet every single kind of inquiry that comes their way to try and find the right fit for their property. And that's complete kind of time waste when they're also doing property management and maybe looking for some new business opportunities. So I went in and said, let me kind of streamline that journey and just present to you with pre-qualified groups ready to move in, removing all that upfront marketing costs. And you can understand your CAC, as you just said, your customer acquisition costs, because you're only going to pay me a percentage of what you're going to make. Mm-hmm. And that's much easier to kind of understand within your kind of P&L and your portfolio.
And you so concisely described that elevator pitch, but I presume that what you've just spoken to there, you gleaned from those customer conversations.
Oh yeah, I knew
right?
absolutely
Right.
nothing about the whole industry, but by pitching the wrong pitch several times and unpacking what they were really experiencing as the landlord, then I was able to kind of understand what their kind of struggles were.
Exactly, perfect. I just want to underscore that for the listeners there, because there's such a crucial lesson in speaking to your customers, not even like listening, more importantly, right? Listening to your customers and focusing on the problem. Again, these things that sound obvious, but listen to them, learn what's the problem, keep that front and center, and then incorporate that into your pitch to get that momentum.
And I have to give a shout out to DebateMate. So when I was a student at university, I was involved in a charity called DebateMate, where you go into underprivileged areas of cities and you teach the students how to debate as an extra curriculum. And all the kids that don't want to be there, that are chucked out of the kind of sports societies, end up in your class. And you have to teach them how to debate. And it was one of the most incredible experiences I went through at university, because when you're teaching someone something, you learn how to do it in kind of the most fluent way possible. And it was all about the art of listening and how the best way to argue is to saying what someone has just said, kind of repeating it back and then breaking it down point by point.
I love that. I love that. We've never had that on the show so far. I love that lesson. That's awesome.
And because it's exactly that, right? Especially when you're in the early days of building, finding the kind of pain points and then finding the solution, being able to articulate it and being able to pitch to clients and then later investors is such an important skill set.
Oh my God, Hannah, it's so important.
It's the art of storytelling.
Right. I love that you mentioned that as well, because it's almost one of those softer skills that I think does get so overlooked. But it is absolutely fundamental to storytell, to know how to the art of persuasion, public speaking, all these elements. You know, a lot of these, natural entrepreneurs that go out in search of a problem to solve, they're there to build, they're there to solve. They're not there to schmooze investors necessarily, right? But it's all part of the package. Okay, so how do we go from Hannah and her Squarespace website to Forbes 30 under 30, VC backing under your belt, team, all the accolades? What got you onto this rocket ship trajectory?
So kind of beginning of 2020, mid 2020, obviously COVID. But before then, I came across the New Enterprise competition, which is a pitching competition for entrepreneurs in Bristol, kind of for University of Bristol students, and the perfect kind of way to get more feedback. So I have to kind of actually map out the business model in even more detail. And then I begin my first ever grant competition. So it was for funding. And I went through that whole process, ended up pitching, it was all online, of course, and we won £5,000 of grant funding. And then I used that to apply to about 3 other grant competitions, and I continued to win grant money. Overall, I probably won around £30,000 of grant funding. So that helped to kind of accelerate our growth in Bristol and hire a first team. But another interesting point, kind of while that was going on in the first grant competition, I also hired a furloughed staff, which was again very unique to COVID. It was an opportunity where I could, for the first time ever, learn how to manage a team of people. It was people who were all under furlough, so they weren't able to be paid by another company because they were already being paid. But it was an initiative that connected furloughed people who were very bored at home to startups who needed support.
Interesting.
So it was a really kind of good match.
That's amazing. I was going to ask you about 2020. Obviously, I knew that you launched then. So I was like, okay, obviously we want to know what happened then. What were the challenges? But very interestingly, some of the entrepreneurs I've interviewed who started at that same stage, like actually there were so many unexpected benefits. I haven't heard that one before, so that's amazing. But that's one that you identify. Actually, you've got all this amazing talent, furloughed, you get to, exercise your manager muscle.
Yeah.
How did you know what were the first roles that you needed, like that first hire?
It was about not just thinking at the time around what HYBR needed, but also who were the great people that were looking for an opportunity. So in the early days, it was kind of junior ops, content management, and then sales. That was for the furloughed staff. And then after after kind of that scheme ended, I looked to kind of looked for two technical consultants who would join the project to help build out the kind of architecture of the platform and help me hire my first in-house developer to kickstart the kind of real growth of the company.
What a fantastic opportunity to even because I know the question of your first hire is always a big one, you know, in the early days when you're starting out, what's that role, what's the sort of person, and, you know, being, you know, quite young, your first kind of business as well, there's so many unknowns and so many people can get that wrong. So it's fantastic that you had that opportunity. But I'm also just, again, wondering for our listeners, like what any of them would do today. Do you know if there's any other schemes or any other ways that people could maybe dip their toe into building out a team, having some talent, learning how to manage other people before fully committing to hiring their own teams?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's so many opportunities. For example, there's SME internship schemes within most large universities like LSE, Imperial, where the university will pay the student to go get experience at startups, at SMEs. So that's a really good way to get your externally funded interns to come and work with you when you can't afford to have any support. And there are quite a few schemes that do that. There are a lot of internship programs globally, especially from Saudi Arabia, actually, where the Saudi government will pay students to go and get experience working in the UK.
Wow.
So externally funded interns is a great first route to be able to kind of, as you said, flex that muscle, understand what kind of support, because it's not until you have really someone in a role that you then work out what that role really needs to look like and what kind of person you're looking for.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very much trial and error in the early days.
It really is trial and error. And I think especially when it does come to people, you're totally right, because we all present ourselves differently in interviews. Not many of us, you know, really know about the art of interviewing either. And I do believe on both sides of the fence, you don't really know what it's like either for the employee, the employer, what it's actually like until you get stuck in.
I think that's the biggest difference. So kind of jumping ahead, but my brother's got a business, and watching my brother set up a business whilst having a network. So my brother was BCG consultant, then was managing director of Africa's first tech unicorn, and then went to start his own business. Starting a business with that kind of experience under your belt, you start with a superstar team because you know exactly who to hire.
Right.
You've worked with them, you pick the best, you also have your own brand already. Versus starting a business out of university, let's be honest, the best, most talented people are not going to join you, and they have good reason not to, because you're not backed by anyone. That no one knows who you are. You're just someone with an idea. So having to go through that transition period and trying to find the right people in the early days is one of the hardest things that you go through.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned that. So before we do move on, I love that you've brought back up the subject of the networking piece. So let's kind of because I know we put a pin in that from before. So let's bring that back. So you're saying about network as a privilege. I presume that example you've just shared with like your brother is an example of that. I know that you're also like queen networker. So I'd love to expand on your thoughts on that. So what exactly do you mean by kind of network as a privilege, and practically how have you gone about building your incredible network?
It's one of those things where, so a bit of context, at HYBR now, because our brand's all about supporting students and building a trusted brand for students, we're thinking about outside of housing, how we can extend that support. And if I look at all my friends and how they kind of transition from students to young professionals, everyone who loves their job were introduced to their job at the pub by a friend, or through a family friend, or through a job experience and internship. So it's kind of a coincidence. It's luck how you discover different industries, and you can work out what's the right route for you. Otherwise, you get pigeonholed through a route that maybe your family did, or something that at university, kind of like the traditional medicine, law, banking, etc. So we really want to give young people the opportunity to expand their network and meet different people from different backgrounds to then understand what's actually out there and what could they end up loving. So I think it's such an important point. And when I was a student at university, I didn't do any networking. It wasn't until I decided to start my own business at HYBR that I forced myself to go to every kind of tech event on meetup.com I could possibly go to. And I'd force myself to feel natural and kind of speak to as many people as possible. Pitching HYBR, and it's every feedback is useful. Like people would tell me, oh, I've heard of that before. There's 3 other companies doing it. And it just gives you more kind of understanding of what's going on in the market, and you can look into them, work out how you want to differentiate yourself. So actually by putting yourself out there and continuously pitching and telling people what you're doing, every single idea or introduction or kind of point of clarity when someone doesn't understand what you're talking about is really useful in building really strong foundational blocks.
It's all data gathering, isn't it?
Exactly.
Any practical tips that you can share with people who either feel introverted, or we will have our down moments where we don't feel like going out, or just even to speak to kind of just the importance of networking, like what's helped you get back out there? Why is it so important? Even if people are going to a few events, it's like, actually, you need to be, really out there hustling.
It's just about, exactly as you just said, putting yourself out there. For example, we've got an ambassador at the moment doing an event tonight, and he said he's really introverted, but he's going to do these events where we stand outside nightclubs and we hand out branded condoms and we pitch and speak to students, because he wants to put himself out there and he wants to gain that confidence that can help him, because he wants to start a business when he graduates. And, amazing and good on him. You have to do that.
Bite the bullet.
Exactly. Like I did the same thing when I was a student. I would put on house parties and I would get local brands to sponsor the house parties. And I ran a few ambassador schemes. I was involved in the Red Bull Wings program, and it's just about, and I really actually hated that. It was like very, you had to wear the outfits, you had to be standing on the streets, speaking to everyone. It's really anxiety inducing.
I'm curious as well, you mentioned, you painted this picture of the house parties and students, and you're on your trajectory now, like graduate, out of uni. How were your friends at this time?
It's an interesting question. And because I was basically launching the business during COVID, because let's be honest, COVID pretty much impacted 2 years. And that meant that people were more secluded, and it meant that I was actually able to work really long hours, and no one really knew I was working those kind of hours. So I was just, fascinated by the industry, learning as much as I could, building out our network. When I say network, I mean build out our community of students and landlords in the hackiest ways you can imagine. We grew all of our students, our first 100 users of students, entirely via Facebook groups. So I was just in Facebook groups every day, about like 15 hours a day. So, I was able to do that away from the kind of, I don't think anyone would judge me, but away from the kind of eyes of my peers, because of that unique setting of COVID. And so there was no pressure of, I was missing nights out, or I was missing, what everyone else was doing, because everyone else was pretty much locked in their own houses.
It made it easier for you.
Yeah.
With kind of the accolades and the Forbes 30 under 30, how are your peers reacting to you now? Are they...
I have a very supportive friendship group, so just very supportive.
Amazing.
No one else, apart from kind of one friend, is started their own business. And I think that's another thing. It's quite rare. It's quite hard to find people your own age who are going through what you're going through.
Exactly.
It's obviously a very unique setting, or kind of I'm not quite sure what to call it.
Yeah.
But you feel aged at times. I think it's like, when my 2 years into starting my own business, and I'd be waking up in the middle of the night worried about the light's going to turn on tomorrow, feeling like I was in like my mid-40s with a mortgage and a family to feed, and I was thinking, I'm too young for this.
Yeah, it makes sense. Well, on the age piece that you mentioned as well, I was wondering, you've encountered either being younger, being a woman, or indeed any other demographic that you feel has got in your way at all?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of interesting research about raising money as a woman, and tests done around when a female voice versus a male voice and the questions they get asked. And I think especially in terms of kind of building out a team and kind of having to fight to be taken seriously. But again, it's all I know. So I think I'm aware that I'm always kind of the youngest in the room, and especially in real estate, one of the only women. I mean, if you can see some of the conferences I'm asked to speak at, I'd like to say it's because of who I am. It's very much not. It's because I'm one of the only female like CEOs that they can invite to speak on the panel.
I'm sure it's also about how you are.
I'm looking at who I'm next to and looking at their experience and thinking I should not be on the stage. And I've only been invited to be on the stage, and I get this opportunity for our brand because of the inequality. So I'm very aware of that in most rooms. And I just, want to be part of the change, and I want to be a kind of role model to encourage more women to do their own ventures.
Fantastic. All right, before I ask you our traditional closing question, is there anything else in the HYBR story that you think would be...
I was told many a times, be careful who you get into bed with. And when you are desperate for cash and you're trying to raise money, and you're trying to grow a business, and you especially got the pressure of having a team, it's very hard to have your wits about you. And it's very hard, especially as a young female entrepreneur, to have that outlook of, I'm interviewing my investors. You're very much, they have the power, they have the strings to the purse. I've had to learn the hard way that you really need to trust every investor like they are they're a shareholder, as if they are kind of your co-founder to some extent. Like, they're part of your team, and they have to be able to add value to what you're doing. And more importantly than that, they have to be able to support you and they buy into what you're doing. And I can promise you that although at the time it might feel like getting that extra cash and closing a round faster is going to help you, in a year, in 2 years' time, it will just screw you over. So it's so important to take your time and really think about who you're getting into bed with, whose money are you taking, and what are you going to have to compromise on. So yeah, can't be very careful about whose money you take.
That's a great lesson. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Hannah. So many valuable lessons learned. A privilege, as I said at the start, to genuinely get to sit down and chat with very busy founders like yourself. So very grateful for your time, Hannah. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
And thank you so much for listening. Really hope you've enjoyed this episode and that you've learned something new or taking some inspiration from Hannah's story. Please hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.